I'm Allison Crawford, 36 years old, and I became a lieutenant colonel in the United States Marine Corps. After years of sacrifice, silence, and service, most people in my own family never truly understood. For years, I tried to stay connected to my younger brother Tim, even when duty kept pulling me away. But when he mocked my career in front of his squad and his gunnery sergeant, I made one quiet choice that changed everything. Have you ever given your best to someone only for them to make you feel small? Share your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I tell you what happened, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being underestimated, hit like and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, respect, and reclaiming your worth. What happened next wasn't loud, but it changed both of us. My father never said he was proud of me. He showed it by getting quiet when I told him I wanted to commission. That kind of quiet, I understood. I'd been watching it my whole life. I grew up in Jacksonville, North Carolina, in a house that sat close enough to Camp Lejeune that you could feel the base woven into the fabric of daily life, the trucks on the perimeter roads, the particular haircuts at the barber shop off Western Boulevard, the way certain men carried themselves through the grocery store, even in civilian clothes on a Saturday morning. Jacksonville is a military town the way some towns are coal towns or fishing towns. It is organized around the installation the way a river town is organized around the water. You don't choose to be shaped by it. You just are, if you grow up there. My father, Robert Crawford, retired from the Marine Corps in 1993 after 20 years of active duty service, leaving with the rank of Gunnery Sergeant, E7, the kind of senior NCO billet that other Marines remember clearly, that junior enlisted speak about with the precision that borders on reverence. He mustered out, took a position with a defense contractor near Jacksonville, and never really left the military world. He just stopped wearing the uniform. He kept everything else, the structure, the routine, the particular economy of words that comes from spending 2 decades in an institution that rewards clarity and punishes waste. Meals at set times, beds made correctly, hospital corners, no argument. Homework completed before anything else was permitted. He was not a cold man. He was a precise one. There is a difference, and I spent my childhood learning to read it. My mother Sandra was the warmth in the house. She worked as a nurse, organized everything my father left unorganized, and connected people to each other the way good connectors do, quietly, persistently, without requiring acknowledgement. She asked the follow-up questions. She remembered the details. She was the one who noticed when something was wrong before anyone had named it yet. I absorbed both of them simultaneously and completely. I made my bed the way my father did, and asked questions the way my mother did. I read his military history books off the shelf when he wasn't in the room and set them back exactly as I'd found them. By the time I was 10 years old, I could name the structure of an infantry company, explain the difference between a fire team and a squad, and tell you what a gunnery sergeant's responsibilities were in a tactical context. I didn't learn this because no one taught it to me. I learned it because I watched a man who had organized his entire identity around service, and I understood, without being able to articulate it yet, that I was going to do the same thing. I was going to do it differently. I was going to do it further. Tim was born on November 10th, 2003. I was 14 years old. The age gap was wide enough that I was, by necessity, as much a second caregiver as I was a sibling. Our mother worked night shifts at the hospital. Our father's consulting schedule was not always predictable. I stepped into the space that was left without being asked to. I taught Tim to walk on the living room carpet, holding both his hands and walking backward, counting the steps out loud until he stopped needing me to count them. I read to him before bed, on the night Sandra worked. I walked him to preschool on mornings when Robert's schedule ran long. I was patient with him in a way that didn't come naturally to most teenagers, methodical, calm, present, in a specific and deliberate way. Tim responded to this. He followed me around the house the way younger children follow the person who makes them feel safest. He reached for me before he reached for his toys, which my mother noticed and called a gift. She wasn't wrong, but she also wasn't fully accounting for the fact that I was already planning to leave. That had been true before Tim was born, and his arrival, much as I loved him, didn't change it. I was going to commission. I was going to serve. That was settled long before November 10th of 2003. What Tim's birth added to my life was a complication I didn't have a name for yet. a genuine bond that I was already, even at 14, going to have to figure out how to maintain across distances I couldn't fully predict. I left for the University of North Carolina in August of 2007 on an NROTC scholarship. The morning I left is one of the few memories I hold with genuine clarity, the kind of clarity that tells you, in retrospect, that something important was ending. My father shook my hand at the car. He didn't hug me. He held on for an extra beat before he let go. My mother stood with her hands clasped and cried quietly, the way Sandra has always cried, which is with her full dignity intact. Tim was 4 years old. He stood on the porch steps and waved at me with the easy confidence of a child who doesn't understand that departure can be permanent. He was waving like I was going to the grocery store and would be back before dinner. Robert watched the car pull out of the driveway and said nothing. Sandra went inside. Tim called after me from the steps. I didn't hear the words. I didn't look back, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew if I did, I would see his face, and I couldn't carry that and still drive away. I've thought about that a lot over the years. The 4 years at Chapel Hill were full, the way years in NROTC are full. Drills, field exercises, coursework, the physical and intellectual grind of building towards something you can't yet fully name, but can feel organizing your life around you like a current. I came home for Thanksgiving some years, and Christmas others. I missed some of both. Tim grew from 4 to 8 during those years, with me as primarily a voice on the phone. Robert answered Tim's questions about me with brief, accurate answers that told Tim nothing he needed to know emotionally. She's training. She's studying. She's doing her job. These were all true. They were also completely insufficient for a child who was trying to understand why his sister was never there. Tim started filling the gaps himself. He created a version of me that was easier to hold, partial, half-imagined, built from the incomplete data points of phone calls and missed holidays. He didn't blame me yet. He just stopped fully knowing me, which is its own kind of loss, and one I didn't fully register until much later. I graduated from UNC and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in June of 2011. My father put on his old dress blues for the ceremony. He hadn't worn them in almost 20 years, and he put them on without comment, pressed them without being asked, and drove to Chapel Hill without mentioning any of it. He didn't have to say anything. I understood what it meant before I saw him in the bleachers. His hands were completely steady when he pinned on my gold second lieutenant bars, the O1 bars that officially made me a commissioned officer of the United States Marine Corps. His jaw was tight, the way it got when he was holding something he wasn't going to name. Sandra photographed everything with a small digital camera. Tim was 7 years old and dressed in clothes he clearly didn't want to be wearing. He watched our father touch my uniform with a reverence he had never seen Robert display for anything else. He sat through the ceremony with his legs swinging under the bleacher seat, watching his sister become something he didn't have a word for. He was old enough to sense the weight of the room. He wasn't old enough to understand it. He would spend a long time not understanding it. After the ceremony, standing on the quad with my new gold bars catching the afternoon light, I watched my father shake my hand the way he'd shaken the hands of officers he respected. For a 7-year-old watching from the bleachers, the gold bars were not a competition. Nobody intended them as one. But the look on Robert Crawford's face when he touched them was the look of a man who had built his entire adult life around a set of values and was watching his firstborn child not just carry those values but exceed the rank he had reached. Tim would grow up under the shadow of that moment without anyone meaning to put it there. I was already thinking about the basic school, about Quantico, about what came next. Tim was swinging his legs. I was already, in every way that mattered, gone. The years between my commissioning and Tim's enlistment are the years I became someone I couldn't fully explain, not to my family, and eventually not even to myself in the ways that count at holiday tables and birthday dinners and the other moments when people expect you to be present and legible. I completed the basic school at Quantico. I completed the infantry officer's course. In December of 2012, I was promoted to First Lieutenant O2, a rank that comes with expanded responsibilities and a clearer sense of the institution you've joined. In June of 2014, I made Captain O3, the rank that in the Marine Corps carries with it a particular weight of professional expectation. That same year, I began the MARSOC assessment and selection pipeline. the process by which the Marine Corps identifies candidates for Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command, a selection process known for an attrition rate that removes the majority of volunteers before they reach the other side of it. I completed the MARSOC individual training course in 2015 and was assigned to a Marine Raider battalion. The call sign Iron 6 came when I assumed my first raid element leadership billet. 6 designates the commanding officer. Iron was the element designation. The call sign was operational, classified, and entirely real. I couldn't explain any of this to my family. I couldn't tell them what I was doing. That's not an excuse. That's the job. But I know what silence sounds like to a kid who just wants to know his sister. Tim was 8 years old when I disappeared into the work that couldn't be named. He was 12 when I completed the individual training course and settled into the operational tempo of MARSOC service. When I came home in those years, infrequently, briefly, and always with the careful posture of someone who has learned to partition their life into compartments that cannot touch. I looked different, leaner, more deliberate, more contained in a way I couldn't explain and didn't try to. Tim would ask, "What do you do?" And I would say things like special assignments or logistics coordination, answers that were technically defensible and functionally useless to a child who wanted to understand his sister. Robert stopped asking after the first few times. Sandra worried quietly and didn't push. Tim began filling the silence with a simpler answer. His sister moved paper and pretended it was important. It took root the way any uncontested idea takes root, slowly, with each repetition becoming slightly more solid than the last, until it had the density of something believed. Then in 2015, when Tim was 11 years old, I called home to say I had been assigned to a new unit. I could not name the unit. He asked, with the genuine curiosity of a kid who was still trying to figure out who his sister was. "Is it at least cool?" I said yes. He said, "But what do you actually do?" I gave him the standard deflection, the one I had used so many times it had become reflexive, smooth, and completely useless. There was a pause on his end that I recognized even then. Not angry, not dramatic. Just a door closing quietly, the way doors close when someone has decided not to try that particular handle anymore. He said okay and moved the conversation on to something else, and I let him. It was the last time Tim would ask about my work with genuine curiosity. After that call, the question stopped being sincere. It became rhetorical. Then eventually it became performance. Between 2016 and 2021, I deployed multiple times and missed most of what mattered at home. I missed Thanksgiving of 2016. I missed Christmas of 2018. I missed Tim's 16th birthday in November of 2019, a birthday he had told Sandra he didn't care about, which is how 16-year-olds indicate they care very much. I missed my father's retirement dinner from his consulting position in 2020. I called when I could. The calls were warm, brief, and apologetic in tone. They didn't land the same way as presents. No call ever does. Tim started making a joke of my absences at family gatherings. When a neighbor at a neighborhood party asked where his sister was, Tim said she was probably shuffling papers somewhere important. He got a laugh. He used the line again. He refined it. By the time he was 16, it was part of his social identity, the kid whose sister had the impressive-sounding job that was definitely not as impressive as she made it sound. He performed this version of me for social comfort, and it became, as performed versions of things often do, something he believed. In March of 2021, I was promoted to Major, 04. I didn't tell Tim. I couldn't figure out how to make him understand what the rank meant, and by then I had accepted, at least partly, that he had already decided who I was. He said it at my father's retirement dinner, Sandra told me a week later. "Oh, Allison's probably shuffling papers somewhere." He got a laugh from the table. Sandra laughed when she told me. I didn't. Tim enlisted in August of 2022. He was 18 years old, and I attended his boot camp graduation at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Paris Island, in December of that year. I drove down in civilian clothes, no rank insignia, no uniform, no suggestion of what I actually did. It was his day. I stood with Sandra and Robert in the family section and watched him graduate as a private E1 raw out of 13 weeks of recruit training. Afterward, on the parade deck, where families cluster in the particular chaotic warmth of graduation day, Tim's new rackmate drifted close. Tim introduced me quickly and without looking at me. My sister, she's in the Corps, logistics. Sandra caught my eye across 2 feet of space. I gave the smallest possible shake of my head. Don't. It was his day. The moment passed. We went to lunch at a restaurant in Beaufort, and nobody mentioned the introduction, and I didn't ask him to correct it. Let him have today. I had said it quietly to Sandra at the car. She nodded. She understood. She has always understood more than she lets on. Tim was assigned to an infantry company at Camp Lejeune in late 2023, promoted to Lance Corporal, E3, by November of that year, after the standard progression of a Marine in his first enlistment cycle. In January of 2024, I was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, 05, and assumed command of the classified MARSOC raid force at Lejeune. We were now, for the first time in our lives, on the same installation. The proximity should have brought us together. It didn't. Tim's squad asked about his sister, and Tim's story had become more detailed and more embedded with each retelling. She worked at a regional headquarters, probably finance or personnel, and the call sign Iron 6 was something she had invented to sound interesting at family gatherings. He told Lance Corporal Marcus Webb, a 20-year-old from his unit, this version of events. Webb laughed. Tim told it again to Lance Corporal Devin Price, 21, another squad mate. The false narrative was embedded now in Tim's social identity within his unit, a piece of armor he wore so consistently he had probably stopped recognizing it as armor. I was one radio transmission away from the moment that would remove it entirely. We were on the same base for almost 2 years. I knew he was there. I ran past his barracks almost every morning. I don't know if he knew I was there. I think he did. I think he chose not to think about it. On the morning of November 10th, 2025, Tim's 22nd birthday, I landed at Camp Lejeune at 0630 after a brief off-installation exercise. The flight line was cold. It was the kind of November morning where the air carries the whole weight of the season in it, sharp and dark and still. I was in full-service uniform, carrying my operational briefing package, and inside my jacket pocket was the birthday card my mother had mailed to me 2 weeks earlier, with a handwritten note tucked inside. Find a way to get this to him, please. He'll want to know you thought of him. I had the card since Tuesday. I could have left it in the unit mailroom. It would have been efficient. Nobody would have thought anything of it. I had 2.5 hours before the 0900 brief at Battalion HQ, and Tim's barracks were on the northern end of the base, not on my direct route to the HQ building, but not far enough out of the way to be a genuine inconvenience. I stood on the tarmac for about 30 seconds weighing this. I hadn't seen Tim in 3 months. I decided against the mailroom and started walking north. I had the card since Tuesday. I could have left it in the mailroom. I didn't. I reached the barracks exterior at 0700. The morning was getting lighter in the gradual way of November mornings, the kind of light that reveals things slowly and without warmth. Several Marines were outside beginning their day. Tim saw me from approximately 30 feet away. I watched his face do something complicated in the space of about 2 seconds. Surprise first, then something harder to read. A calculation running behind his eyes that I recognized even at distance. He was standing in front of his entire social world. 3 of his closest Marines were right there. His Gunnery Sergeant, Mike Brennan, E7, a career NCO in his early 40s with over 20 years in the Corps, was nearby conducting a gear check on a group of Marines about 15 feet from Tim's position. I watched Tim take in the configuration and make his choice. He called out loudly enough for the whole group to hear. Hey, Gunny, my sister's here, the one I told you about. He waved me over with deliberate casualness, the kind that takes practice. I kept walking toward him. When I was close enough, he said it. She's got this call sign she made up iron something. Tell him, sis. I dare you. This was not an offhand comment. I understood that immediately. Tim had thought about a moment like this, or had been building toward one, consciously or not, for a long time. He wanted Brennan to smile. He wanted the squad to watch his sister try to make a call sign sound real and not have it land. He wanted, in some way he couldn't have named even to himself, to make me small in front of the people who respected him. That was what this was. I had 14 years of memory with this person, and I could read him. I knew exactly what was happening. I didn't flinch, I didn't look at Brennan, I didn't scan the squad, or raise my voice, or explain myself, or flush, or do any of the things Tim had arranged this moment to produce. I looked at Tim, just looked at him, with the full weight of knowing him, the full weight of every year, and then I reached into my jacket pocket and held out the birthday card. "From Mom!" I turned to leave. The squad was completely still. Tim was holding the card. He looked like he had been braced for a denial, a defensive explanation, a flushed face. He received none of those things, and for a moment the taunt simply had nowhere to go. It hung in the cold air with nothing to attach itself to. I was 2 steps into walking away when Gunnery Sergeant Brennan's radio crackled. The transmission was clear, and it carried across the morning air to everyone within 30 feet. "Gunny, confirm Iron 6 is on site for the 0900 brief at Battalion HQ." The world did not stop. The world kept going exactly as it had been going. The difference was that Gunnery Sergeant Mike Brennan, 20-plus years in the United States Marine Corps, a career that had taken him through enlisted service at every level up to E7, heard the words, Iron 6, and understood precisely what they meant. 6 designates the commanding officer. Iron 6 is the call sign of the CO of the Iron Element, a MARSOC raid force. A lieutenant colonel briefing Battalion HQ at 0900 on a joint operations matter does not work in logistics, does not work in finance, does not work at a regional desk pushing paper. Brennan's eyes went to the radio, then to me, then, for just a fraction of a second, a fraction that Tim would remember for a long time, to Tim. Brennan stepped back. Not theatrically, instinctively, the way a professional realigns when rank has just clarified in a way he hadn't been prepared for. He pressed his radio. "Confirmed, sir." A pause, then addressing me directly, clearly, and without hesitation, "Lieutenant Colonel Crawford." Tim could not look at anyone. Not at Brennan, not at Webb or Price, not at me. His jaw was set in the way jaws set when a person is working very hard not to show anything at all, and mostly succeeding. I walked. I did not look back. I did not adjust my pace. I moved the way I always move, direct and purposeful, with nothing wasted, toward the thing I was there to do. Behind me was silence. Tim was standing with the birthday card in his hand. Webb and Price were not looking at each other. Brennan had already turned back to the gear check, but the set of his posture was different. Tim said nothing for the rest of the morning. He would not speak to me again that day. He would not speak to me for 7 days. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to, because I had been walking away from that moment for 4 years, and I knew exactly where it ended. Reality had simply arrived on its own schedule. I hadn't engineered it, I had only refused to stop it. That distinction mattered to me. It still does. Tim's hand closed around the birthday card, and not one of his squad mates could find a single thing to say. The brief went well. The brief always goes well. That is one of the things I have come to rely on about the work. It does not have room inside it for whatever is happening in the rest of your life. And I have spent 15 years being quietly grateful for that. I walked into Battalion HQ at 0855 and was fully present in the Joint Operations Conference Room by 0900. Fluorescent lights, whiteboards covered in the preliminary markings of the previous evening's prep work. Coffee that had been sitting in the urn since approximately 0700 and tasted like it. My executive officer, Major Derek Okafor, 04, 32 years old, the kind of officer who has understood since early in his career that the best thing a good XO can do is be exactly as prepared as his commanding officer, was present in a supporting capacity, seated to my left at the table. I briefed. I presented operational parameters for the upcoming joint exercise between my MARSOC raid force and the infantry battalion. Timelines, integration points, communications protocols, contingency structures for the scenarios where something goes sideways because something always goes sideways and you plan for it anyway. I fielded questions with precision. I answered the Battalion S3's concern about communications, frequency, deconfliction, with the full detail it required and nothing beyond it. Nobody in that room knew what had happened at the barracks 45 minutes before the brief began. Nobody was going to find out from me. The brief ran 90 minutes, closed cleanly, and generated 3 follow-up questions from the S3 that I answered in the hallway before gathering my materials and leaving. The brief went 90 minutes. I filed the after-action summary, answered 3 follow-up questions from the S3, and didn't think about Tim once. I'm good at that. Okafor noticed something in the parking lot after. Not in my face. I am careful about my face, but in the particular way I was moving as we walked to the vehicle. Efficient, controlled, a fraction too deliberate in the way people become when they are managing something they have not yet processed. He has worked alongside me for 2 years, and he reads me the way good XOs read their commanding officers, which is accurately and without making a performance of it. He asked without preamble if I was all right. I said yes. He didn't push. We walked to the car. At the car, I stopped. There is something about the transition between enclosed professional space and open air that sometimes makes it possible to say what I wouldn't say indoors. I said, "My brother tried to embarrass me in front of his gunnery sergeant this morning. The radio announced my call sign in the middle of it." Okafor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What happened?" I told him. All of it. The dare, the card, Brennan's face going flat with recognition, the walk. Okafor listened the whole way through without offering a verdict, which is one of the things I have come to value most about him. He didn't know. He knew I was a lieutenant colonel. He just didn't believe it. In the car, riding back to the compound, I was quiet. Not performing quiet, actually quiet, inside my own head, in a way that doesn't happen often. I thought about Tim's boot camp graduation at Paris Island and the word logistics. I thought about the phone call in 2019 when he asked why I had missed his high school graduation ceremony, and I told him what I could tell him, and it wasn't enough, and I knew it wasn't enough, and I said it anyway because it was all I had. I thought about standing behind Sandra on the parade deck at Paris Island, watching our father's face as Tim marched through. I thought about 2 years on the same installation with almost no contact. Okafor asked at some point whether I was going to reach out to Tim. I said no. He nodded once. That was the complete conversation. No. Okay. Later in the afternoon, I sat in my office with the knowledge that Tim had the birthday card and almost certainly hadn't opened it yet. I thought about Sandra, who had mailed the card to me 2 weeks early with a handwritten note folded inside it asking me to find a way to get it to Tim in time for his birthday. Sandra does not know exactly what I do. She knows the Corps in the broad sense from 4 decades of living alongside it. First as a daughter of a Marine community, then as the wife of a gunnery sergeant turned contractor. She has never asked me to explain my work in detail. She has never asked for more than I could offer. She mails the birthday cards every year on time to wherever I am. She just writes the same thing. "I'm proud of you. Stay safe." I have kept every one of them, stored in a small box that has traveled with me to every duty station I've been assigned to since 2011. I picked up my phone. I almost called her. I put it down. This was not Sandra's weight to carry, and I wasn't going to put it there. My mother has sent birthday cards to both of us every year since I first deployed. Every year, no matter where I was. She just writes, "I'm proud of you. Stay safe." I've kept all of them. I ran 3 miles that evening. I ate. I reviewed the next day's schedule and confirmed the outstanding items that required action in the morning. I did not hear from Tim. I had not expected to. The day closed the way most of my days close, in order, in quiet, with everything accounted for and the next thing already visible. But before I turned off the light, I let myself hold one thought I didn't examine. I hoped he had opened the card. Not because I needed him to have read it. Because my mother had written his name on it in her small, neat handwriting, and I wanted him to know she thought of him. That was all. That is the part that doesn't have anything to do with rank or career or classified work or any of the rest of it. I am still someone's older sister. That hasn't changed and it won't. Somewhere across the base, Tim Crawford was lying on his rack in the dark, and his mother's birthday card was still sealed on the edge of his bed. In the week after the barracks scene, I did not reach out to Tim. That silence was not passive. It was a deliberate withdrawal of the effort I had been quietly extending for years. The calls, the cards, the detours, the carefully worded answers to questions I couldn't fully answer. I had been the one crossing the distance consistently for a long time. I was done being the one who crossed it first. On the other side of the installation, Tim's social world had reorganized itself around a new reality. The morning after the scene, Lance Corporal Marcus Webb found Tim after the lunch meal, when the others weren't around, and asked with deliberate neutrality, "So your sister is like, special operations?" Tim said he didn't know. Webb said, Gunnery Sergeant Brennan called her Lieutenant Colonel. That's '05. She's been in since before you were in high school. Tim said, yeah. Webb said, and she's at Lejeune? In Marsac? Tim didn't answer. Webb didn't push it further. But the easy, familiar rhythm of their banter, the specific current of it that had always included jokes about my invented prestige, was gone. It didn't get replaced with anything different. It simply disappeared, the way a specific word disappears from a conversation when everyone has simultaneously and silently agreed it doesn't apply anymore. Did you actually know what she does? No. Gunnery Sergeant Brennan did not pull Tim aside. He did not give a speech or a correction or any kind of formal acknowledgement that something had happened outside the barracks at 0700 on November 10th. He didn't need to. Brennan had over 20 years in the Corps and understood precisely how professional recalibration works. You don't announce it, you simply realign, and the person on the receiving end feels the difference immediately, because they know what the before looked like. His tone with Tim in the days following the barracks scene was clipped, correct, and stripped of the casual ease that had previously characterized their interactions. Formation ran exactly as scheduled, duties were assigned and completed correctly. Everything was formally and professionally fine. Tim felt the absence of the small, informal goodwill that senior NCOs extend to junior enlisted they've decided to invest in. Because you only feel that absence once you understand what was there. There was no confrontation. There didn't need to be. The chill communicated everything Brennan needed to communicate. He told me later, much later, that Brennan didn't say a single word about it. Just looked at him differently. In the Corps, that's almost worse. On November 14th, Tim sat down at the MWR computer lab and searched for my name. He found a 2011 UNC NROTC commissioning notice with my name and a list of new officers. He found a regimental unit citation that listed a commendation but identified no individual personnel. He found the Marine Corps officer roster, which gave him my name, my rank, Lieutenant Colonel, and my duty station, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. That was all the public record offered. He then searched MARSOC and read what the publicly available sources had. Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command, Marine Raiders, Direct Action Operations, Counterterrorism, Special Reconnaissance. He read about the assessment and selection pipeline, the attrition rates that removed the majority of volunteers before they reached the other side, the prerequisites, the years of required prior service in the conventional force before a Marine could even apply. He did the math. Commission 2011. 14 years of service to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel commanding a MARSOC element. He looked at a map of the installation and found, approximately, where the MARSOC compound sat relative to his own barracks. He did not go there. He looked at the map for a long time. I don't know exactly what he read. He told me some of it later. He said he just kept reading and the picture kept getting bigger, and he couldn't figure out when to stop. On November 15th, I briefed my staff on planning milestones for the January joint exercise. I was thorough, direct, and on schedule. After the briefing, Okafor lingered near the door and asked quietly if I'd heard from Tim. I said no. I didn't look troubled by this. I moved to the next agenda item. Later that afternoon, I ran my standard 3 miles at 1700 hours, the same base loop I had been running since I arrived at Lejeune in January of 2024, almost 2 years before. The northern end of the loop passed within visual range of the general vicinity of Tim's barracks. I didn't break stride when I passed it. I kept the same pace I had kept for 2 years, which was the pace I intended to keep, regardless of what was happening 3 buildings to my left. I'll wait as long as he needs. And if he doesn't call, then that's his answer too. On November 16th, the birthday card had been sitting on the edge of Tim's rack for 6 days. He picked it up in the evening, when the barracks room was quiet and the day's duties were done. He opened it. Sandra's handwriting was small and neat, the same handwriting that had addressed birthday cards to me on every base I had ever been assigned to. She had written, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. We're so proud of both of you. Allison carried this for 2 weeks trying to find a way to get it to you in time. Love, Mom and Dad." Tim read it twice. Then he sat on the edge of his rack and held the card open and thought about what it meant, about the fact that I had been carrying that card since 2 weeks before his birthday, that I had rearranged a morning that included a classified military briefing at Battalion HQ specifically to deliver it in person, that I had walked to his barracks not because it was efficient, but because Sandra had asked me to, and because I had decided that was enough of a reason. He had responded to that effort by daring me in front of his gunnery sergeant. He sat with that for a long time. When he picked up his phone, he didn't dial yet, but the calculation had shifted. The turn was not about rank, it was about effort. Allison had made a specific, deliberate effort, and he had repaid it with a public performance of contempt. When he finally saw that clearly, the false narrative had no structure left to hold it up. Tim held the birthday card open, alone in his barracks room, and for the first time in 4 years, he was not managing his feelings about his sister. He was just having them. Life in an infantry company does not pause for personal recalibrations. In the weeks after the barracks scene, Tim showed up to formation and ran drills and completed his duties the way Marines do. Forward, without ceremony, because the institution doesn't offer much space for internal weather. But the social texture around him had shifted in ways that were hard to name precisely and impossible to ignore entirely. Devon Price, who had been standing outside the barracks when Brennan's radio crackled, had stopped mentioning me entirely, not in an uncomfortable way, just with a completeness that was its own kind of statement. Webb followed Price's lead. The unit humor that had previously circulated around Tim's fake impressive sister had simply stopped, not replaced with something else, just absent, the way a specific word disappears from a group's vocabulary when everyone has simultaneously and silently agreed it no longer applies. Nobody rubbed Tim's face in what had happened. That isn't the culture, but nobody pretended it hadn't happened either. And in a unit environment, the absence of pretense is its own language. He told me no one brought it up, said that was actually worse, because it meant everyone had already processed it and moved on. He was the only one still sitting with it. In late November, Brennan ran a gear inspection on the squad. He worked methodically down the line, reaching each Marine in turn with the same steady attention he brought to everything. When he reached Tim, his assessment was accurate, fair, and completely professional, which is to say it was correct, thorough, and entirely devoid of the small, informal ease he had previously extended during these moments. He identified a pack configuration problem, marked it, and corrected it without additional comment before moving to the next Marine. There was no anger in the correction and no performance of displeasure. There was simply the absence of something Tim hadn't fully registered as present until it was gone. The slight warmth, the dry aside, the gunnery sergeant's particular vocabulary of approval through informality that exists in the space between formal correctness and genuine professional regard. Tim watched Brennan move down the line and understood precisely what he had cost himself. Not just in his relationship with me, with a man he respected and had wanted to impress. Gunny used to actually talk to me at these. Yeah, Tim went back to the MWR computer lab in late November and read more carefully this time with the specific purpose of understanding rather than assembling a surface picture. He found the official MARSOC mission description. He read the assessment and selection attrition statistics. Fewer than half of volunteer candidates completing the pipeline in any given cycle. He read that MARSOC raters must have completed a minimum of 2 years of prior conventional Marine Corps service before applying. He read that commanding officers of MARSOC elements hold the grade of lieutenant colonel or above. He did the math for the second time, more deliberately. Commission 2011, Assessment and Selection, Pipeline 2014, Individual Training Course Completion, 2015, Command Assumed, 2024. 14 years of service. He sat back from the terminal and thought about every time he had said the word logistics. He thought about every person he had said it to. He thought about Paris Island and the parade deck and how I had given the smallest possible shake of my head when Sandra caught my eye. I don't know the exact moment he understood. I don't think it was one moment. I think it just kept getting heavier until he couldn't hold it the old way anymore. On Christmas Day, December 25th, Sandra and Robert called Tim on video. I sent a separate voice message, brief and warm, the kind of message I've learned to record in 30 seconds without losing anything essential. Merry Christmas, hope you're eating something decent. I'll call when I'm back in signal range. On the video call, Robert asked, "How's your sister treating you?" Tim paused a beat longer than usual. He said, "Good. She's busy." Robert nodded in a way that said he understood more about this family's specific geometry than he had ever put into words. Sandra smiled carefully. The call ended normally. Afterward, Tim listened to my voice message twice. He did not reply to it. How's your sister treating you? Good, she's busy. In early January of 2026, Webb noticed something shifting in Tim. Noticed it the way Marines notice things, which is to say, quietly and without narrating it aloud. Tim had stopped making jokes, not just about me, but about things generally. He showed up early, he pushed back on nothing, he did the work with a directness and consistency that was new enough to register without being dramatic enough to name. His rack was tighter, his gear checks were cleaner in ways that reflected attention rather than performance. He asked Brennan a procedural question one morning, purely operational, no social overlay, and Brennan answered it directly. The exchange lasted 20 seconds. Webb mentioned to Price afterward that it was like something had turned a dial in Tim. Neither of them identified what had turned it. Tim's transformation was not dramatic. It was daily. He was becoming, almost without deciding to, someone who was present and accountable, and no longer managing anyone's perception of his family, because there was no longer a false version to manage. The false narrative had collapsed and taken the need for armor with it. He could just be the Marine standing in front of him. That is a surprisingly light way to live. Tim's barracks room in early January of 2026. Rack squared, boots aligned, phone face down on the desk, and nothing in the room trying to prove anything to anyone. Tim called on November 17th, 7 days after the barracks scene. I was in my office reviewing exercise logistics when the call came through. I saw his name on the screen, set the document flat on the desk, and answered on the second ring. His first word was, Allison. Not sis, not Allie, not a deflection or an opener or a joke he was using to buy himself entry to the conversation. Just my name, said the way you say someone's name when you have decided, before the call began, to take them seriously. I said, hey, a pause, then. I read the card. He didn't lead with an apology. He asked if I was doing okay. I said yes. He said he had been trying to figure out what to say for a week and hadn't been able to land on anything satisfying. I said, take your time. He told me he had looked up what MARSOC does, the public information, he was careful to say, just what was available publicly. He said he hadn't realized how serious it was. I said I knew. He said, you've been at Lejeune since January of 2024, right? When you took command? I said yes. He said, we've been on the same base for almost 2 years. I said, yeah. And I was telling people you worked a desk job. I know. He sat with that for a moment. I didn't fill the silence for him. He was arriving at his own understanding of the distance between what he had believed and what was true, and I was not going to help him cross it faster than he could cross it on his own. I was receiving him, which meant I was waiting for him to bring himself all the way to the door. Then he said he was sorry, not for the specific moment outside the barracks for 4 years of it, for the whole architecture of the thing he had built and performed for his squad and anyone else who asked about his sister. He said, I turned you into a joke. I made it a running bit because I didn't know what else to do with you. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, I know it wasn't easy to grow up with someone who was always leaving. He said, that's not an excuse. I said, no, it's not, but I understand it. He didn't say anything for a moment after that. The silence between us was different from the silences that had characterized our relationship for years. This one had weight to it, but not the bad kind. I turned you into a joke because I didn't know what else to do with you. I know it wasn't easy to grow up with someone who was always leaving. That's not an excuse. No, it's not, but I understand it. I did not tell Tim what I do. I did not name the unit, the mission set, the operational parameters, the clearance level, the nature of the brief at Battalion HQ, or any of the details that had preceded or followed the barracks scene. I said, I do something that matters. That's all I can tell you. He said, yeah, I know. A beat passed between us. Then Tim said, happy birthday to me, right? It was tentative, the first attempt at humor since he'd said my name. Carefully placed, the way humor gets placed when you're not certain it will land. I said, did you at least eat something good? He laughed, a real one, short and not performing itself. Brennan had us on detail all day. I said, classic. And that was the first moment in the entire call that sounded like us, not a reckoning, not a procedure, not two people carefully managing an important conversation. Just siblings for a few seconds over something small and specific. Happy birthday to me, right? Did you at least eat something good? Brennan had us on detail all day. Classic. After the call, I sat for a moment in my office, not processing, just sitting. Then I picked up the operational document I had set face down on the desk and continued with the work. Across the installation, Tim put his phone down. He opened his desk drawer, took out the birthday card. He had moved it from the edge of his rack to the desk the day after reading it, folded it carefully, and placed it inside the drawer. Not balanced on the edge where it had been sitting, inside. He closed the drawer. Both of us were choosing to move toward something. Neither was making a declaration about it. Neither needed to. That was enough to start with. He called me by my name, not Sis, not Allie, Allison, like he'd decided, at some point in the week before, to talk to someone he'd made up his mind to actually know. Tim placed the birthday card carefully inside the desk drawer and closed it. And this time, it didn't feel like he was filing something away. December of 2025 through March of 2026. The relationship between Tim and me didn't resolve in any dramatic or definitive sense. It shifted, quietly, incrementally, the way a tide moves back from a place it's been stuck for a long time. There were texts, there was a Christmas call that functioned, there was a January exercise that went well. Tim's conduct was improving in ways that Gunnery Sergeant Brennan had started to note. My own life was sharp and grounded and full, but I was beginning to feel the edges of something I hadn't named yet. An awareness that what we were building was real, and that the conditions allowing it were not permanent. On December 12th, Tim texted me while I was briefly off installation for a short training exercise. The text said, "Hope the exercise went okay." I read it, then I read it again. That was the first unsolicited, non-obligatory communication Tim had initiated with me in 3 years, possibly longer. There was no occasion for it. He wasn't responding to something I had said. He wasn't reaching out because a family event required it. He had simply texted me because he thought of me and decided that was a sufficient reason to send something. I wrote back, "It did. You survived Brennan." He wrote, "Barely. 5 words from each of us." I read his response twice before I sent mine. His first text, just, "Hope the exercise went okay." I read it twice. It probably sounds like nothing. After 4 years of silence, it was everything. On Christmas Day, all 4 Crawfords were on a video call for the first time in recent memory, and it actually functioned, meaning everyone was present, nobody was performing anything, and the call ended without anyone having said something that required days of processing afterward. Robert asked questions with more directness than he usually managed. About my upcoming schedule, about whether I would get back to Jacksonville before spring, about Tim's re-enlistment timeline. Sandra provided the warmth and continuity, the way she always had. Tim said less than our parents, but significantly more than he had contributed to any Crawford family call in recent years. He asked what I was training for in general terms. I said, "Advanced integration exercise." He nodded at the screen. He had been in the Corps long enough now to understand what that category of answer meant, even without the specifics. He didn't mock it. He didn't deflect or redirect with a joke. He just nodded, the way someone nods when they have decided to take information at face value. After the call, Sandra texted me. 4 words. "He's different." I texted back, "I know. He's different. I know." The joint exercise I had briefed in November ran in January of 2026 and went cleanly. My unit performed at standard. The integration with the infantry battalion was smoother than the previous year's exercise, which the after-action review documented with a precision that was professionally satisfying. Okafor said after the review, "Nice work." I said, "Our people did the work." He said, "You trained them." I moved to the next agenda item. In February, I scored at the top of my age group on the standard physical fitness evaluation, which I mention not out of pride, but because it is the kind of data point that tells you where your life actually is versus where you imagine it is. I ran the base loop at 0530 every morning, the same route I had been running since January of 2024, nearly 2 years. The northern end of the route passed within visual range of the vicinity of Tim's barracks. I started noticing that pass in November. Every time I ran it now, I was aware of it. I didn't slow down. I kept the same pace. I've run the same route since I got to Lejeune. His barracks are at the north end. I've passed that turn 400 times. I didn't start thinking about him when I passed it until after November. In February, Brennan ran a patrol techniques evaluation on the squad. He reached Tim's position and reviewed the setup. He corrected Tim's sector coverage, a specific adjustment in technique that Tim hadn't been applying, and then he said, "You've been running your drills tighter. Keep it up." 6 words. He moved on down the line. Webb raised an eyebrow at Tim from across the position. Tim's jaw was set differently than it had been 3 months before. This is what earning something back looks like. 6 words from a gunnery sergeant and a professional nod, and nothing more needed. Brennan wasn't performing forgiveness. He was noting a fact. Tim had been doing the work, and the Corps acknowledges work the way it acknowledges everything. Plainly, once, and then onward. "You've been running your drills tighter. Keep it up." In March, I was late in my office, reviewing paperwork for a command assessment. I had been in command for a little over 2 years. At some point, not immediately, not necessarily soon, but eventually and certainly, there would be a rotation. The Marine Corps does not leave lieutenant colonels in command billets indefinitely. I might go to Quantico. I might go to the Pentagon. I might go somewhere I couldn't name to anyone outside the relevant command structure. When that happened, Tim and I would stop being on the same installation. The proximity that had nearly driven us further apart would end, and we would go back to the phone calls and the birthday cards and the holiday texts that had been the full architecture of our relationship for years. I sat with that thought and noticed for the first time that I didn't want the current version of things to end without having shown up in person. Not for a briefing, not in passing, not because something logistical required my presence, but because I actually wanted to. I picked up my phone. I set it back down. The words weren't quite there yet. Command tours don't last forever. At some point I'll rotate and we'll be somewhere different, and it'll go back to being calls and cards. I started thinking about that in March. I hadn't let myself think about it before. Allison looked out her office window at the quiet base in the dark and realized she was thinking about asking her brother for coffee. Not as an obligation, not as a check-in, but because she actually wanted to see him. On Sunday, April 5th of 2026, I sent Tim a text at 08:30 in the morning. "Off Saturday morning, MWR Cafe at 9 if you're around." I put the phone face down and went back to the operational summary I'd been reading. 40 seconds later, the phone buzzed. I picked it up. "Tim, I'll be there." I looked at the message for a moment, then I set the phone face down again and went back to the operational summary. But I was, for a second, smiling. Not broadly, not performing anything, just the expression that happens when something simple lands exactly right. He texted back in 2 minutes. He used to take 3 days, if he responded at all. I don't know why the 2 minutes hit me so hard. I just know it did. We met on Saturday, April 12th, at the MWR Facility Cafe at 0900. The base was quiet in the way Saturday mornings make it quiet, with the particular piece of reduced operational tempo, maintenance crews moving through their routes, a few runners on the perimeter roads, the specific relaxed quality that comes over a military installation when nothing is pressing. The MWR Cafe had the institutional character all MWR facilities share. Generic tables, overhead lighting calibrated to neither warmth nor purpose, coffee that is mediocre by design and familiar by now. Tim was already there when I arrived. We got our coffee and sat down across from each other at a table near the window. And there was no agenda, which is an unusual quality for any meeting I have been part of in the last 15 years of my professional life. Tim asked about the January exercise in general terms, not fishing for details, just genuinely asking how it had gone. I said, well, he asked what time I had run that morning. I said 05:30. He said he had been running mornings too, which was new. I asked how far. He said about 4 miles, working up to more. I nodded. He asked if I ever ran the Northern Loop, and I said yes, every day. He didn't say anything to that specifically, but something in his expression shifted, and I understood that he had known I ran past his barracks. He had probably known for a while. We talked for 2 hours. About our parents, Robert had been spending more time with his old Corps contacts since stepping back from the consulting work, attending reunions and lunches with former enlisted he had served alongside, which Sandra had noted with a mixture of relief and dry amusement that is entirely characteristic of her. About Tim's thinking on re-enlistment. About the base, the weather, a gear malfunction in Tim's unit 2 weeks before. That had been a genuine near miss, and was, from a certain angle and with enough distance, genuinely funny. The conversation was easy, not constructed or effortful, not 2 people navigating around something, just 2 people who serve in the same branch at the same installation, talking like people who know each other. That was what it felt like. That was what it was. I'm thinking about re-enlisting. What's making you think about it? I don't know. I feel like I've actually started doing the job for real. Like, recently. Near the end of the 2 hours, Tim looked at his coffee cup and said, without looking up, I told Brennan I was sorry. Not about what happened specifically, just that I was sorry for how I'd represented our family. I went still. I said, how'd he take it? Tim said, he said noted, and walked away. I laughed. A real one, not polished, not calibrated, just the laugh that arrives when something is precisely right and you have no reason to manage it. Tim looked up, surprised. Then he laughed too, short, genuine, without performance. I said, classic Brennan. He said, yeah. We sat with it for a moment, both of us in the same register for the first time in a very long time. Then Tim said, I'm glad you stopped by with the card. I said, me too. He said noted and walked away. Classic Brennan. I'm glad you stopped by with the card. Me too. We walked out together. The base was quiet and bright in the April morning, the kind of day that feels like the year has finally figured out what it's doing. Our paths diverged at a fork near the northern end of the facility. Tim said, same time next week? I said I was off-site Thursday through Sunday, but the week after. He said, week after. We parted without ceremony, no gesture, no speech, no manufactured moment. Just two Marines who happened to be siblings going back to their respective days. He said same time next week like it was just what we did. Like it had always been what we did. I thought about that for the rest of the day. In late April, at the end of a long week, I was on my bunk in my quarters with the base quiet outside. I thought about the coffee, about Tim's laugh when I said classic Brennan, about 2 minutes to respond to a text, about a 22-year-old Marine going to his gunnery sergeant and saying he was sorry for how he had represented his family, not because anyone required it, not because there was a consequence attached to not doing it, but because he had become, somewhere in the months between November and April, someone who did the right thing without being asked. I thought about what I would say to the version of myself standing at the UNC commissioning ceremony in June of 2011, with my father's hand steady on my gold bars and Tim swinging his legs in the bleachers. I thought about the porch steps in August of 2007, and Tim waving like I was going to the store and would be back before dinner. I picked up my phone and texted Sandra, "He's going to be fine." Sandra responded in 4 seconds. I know. I always knew. I set the phone on the nightstand, closed my eyes, and the base settled into the particular quiet of a Friday night when the week is finally done. I didn't walk away from my brother. I walked to a place he could finally find me. It took 14 years and one morning outside the barracks. I'll take it. If you've been holding your ground for someone who isn't ready yet, hold it a little longer. Not forever. Just long enough to find out if they're worth it. Sometimes the answer is yes. In the end, I didn't need revenge, an argument, or a public correction. The truth arrived on its own, and Tim had to decide what kind of man he wanted to become after seeing it. Sometimes standing your ground doesn't mean cutting someone off forever. It means refusing to shrink while they figure out whether they're willing to grow. If this story resonated with you, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Have you ever stayed silent while someone underestimated you? Did they ever realize the truth? And would you have forgiven Tim or kept your distance?